Hello everyone, welcome to English Digest.
I'm Sam.
And I'm Angeline, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about our picture writing unit. If you take a look at our pictures for this writing exercise, you'll notice there are a few themes we can write about. For example, homelessness, beggars, or panhandlers, P-A-N-H-A-N-D-L-E-R, panhandler, or even how the general public reacts to panhandling.
今天呢，我们要来写一篇看图写作了。那这些图片呢，看了第一眼，大概就知道今天我们写这个文章呢，大概脱离不了这个无家可归啦，或者是我们刚刚讲的 panhandler， 就是乞讨的这些人有关系咯。
What do you do when a person asks you for spare change, Sam?
I really don't know. On one hand, this person is in need. My spare change can get him or her a meal. On the other hand, I'm not sure if this money would go to meals. I'm not sure what they're going to buy. Maybe like drugs or alcohol.
Yes, this is definitely a very tricky issue to handle. Firstly, you're not sure if you're feeding into a drug or alcohol addiction, like Sam said, or whether this beggar is actually part of a crime syndicate.Specializing in professional panhandling.
Yes, I heard a lot of story about that.
Exactly. I don't know if you've heard, but in some third world countries, you'll see that there are kids and they're usually missing a limb or they're missing a finger or something. And that's actually because the crime syndicate actually chopped off their limb or chopped off their finger so that they could get more sympathy.And that's how they make money from these kids.
So
it's very terrible. And if you do give money to these little kids, unfortunately, you are encouraging this behavior. I've actually learned the best way to handle panhandling is to offer food or drink. I've actually done this before. You could also donate or volunteer at shelters. That's another way you can help.So going back to the pictures in the writing unit, I think there will be some interesting and diverse interpretations. So let's begin. What does our writing prompt say?
好，马上呢看到我们今天这个看图写作的提示了。他说呢，请仔细观察右方3幅连环图片的内容，并想象第4幅图片可能的发展呢。我们今天呢要写出一篇120字以上的文章，文章呢需涵盖连环图片的内容，并且呢要给它一个完整的结局喽。
This month's writing exercise consists of a series of 3 pictures. The 4th picture is a huge question mark, which means you get to decide the ending. Our writing prompt asks us to carefully observe the pictures provided and write an essay with at least 120 words. It's important to pay close attention to how the pictures relate to one another because the essay must touch on the content of all 3 pictures. Now, we have quite a lot of flexibility for this writing task because there is really only one thing we need to keep in mind, and that is the essay should have no fewer than 120 words. So take a moment to study the pictures carefully and jot down what you see, like the characters' facial expressions, body language, surroundings, and other important details you notice.In the first picture, we notice a man sitting with his back against the wall. Now his clothes are tattered, his hair is unkempt, and he looks miserable. There's a sign beside him that says, "Hungry, need help," and he's holding out a mug. Based on these clues, we can assume this man is homeless and has resorted to panhandling.
今天这篇呢看图写作的自由度很高哦，因为呢我们题目只有要求要写120字以上，那其他呢我们就是看着图片自由发挥了。所以呢在今天呢我们就是重点就要把我们图片上的所有细节都描述出来，把它变成一个完整的故事咯。那在观察图片的细节的时候呢，刚刚Angeline老师就提醒大家，除了这个简单可见的之外呢，比方说我们知道说是一个男人他在街上，这些简单显而易见的之外呢，大家要多多观察人物的肢体语言，观察他的表情，还有呢我们这个背景这个环境里面有什么的细节，这样子呢不仅可以让你更容易把故事拼凑出来呢，也让读者更能想象图片里面呈现了什么首先呢我们看到第一张图片呢，这个人呢他坐在路边，看起来脸上的表情不是很开心，旁边呢还写了一个这个 hungry need help， 他这个需要帮助，他没东西吃，所以呢我们可以推测呢他应该是一位无家可归的人，他正在乞讨。
In contrast to this panhandler, the man who we see entering the second picture seems to be better off. Okay, so he seems to be in a chirpy mood. He's whistling or humming. His clothes and hair are neat and tidy. He seems to walk past the panhandler without any acknowledgement of him, though. Anyway, the pictures are open for interpretation, and there are no wrong answers as long as they are logical.
那第二张图片呢，我们就出现了我们故事另外一位主角了。那可以看看他的这个穿着打扮、表情，还有他的这个身边呢有什么不一样的东西。比方说我们看到他旁边有个音符，所以呢我们可以说呢他看起来是这个干净整齐，他在吹着口哨，所以呢他看起来是很开心，跟我们刚刚这个第一幅图片的这个主角呢是形成了一个对比。那所以呢这两位主角呢后面第三张图以及第四张图这个问号会有什么样的火花，最后会有什么样的结局，就要呢仰赖各位的想象力咯。
So picture writing essays are a form of narrative essays, which means you are telling a story. What this means is that there should be a lot of descriptive language in your essay to help explain what is going on in the picture and even fill in the gaps. The focus of a narrative essay is the plot, so you should tell the story with enough vivid descriptions to build to a climax. What makes these narratives more appealing is a story with a twist at the end, a conclusion that is completely unexpected.
看图写作呢，我们就是要描述、要叙述这个图片里的人事物哦，所以呢，它自然是一篇叙述文。那叙述文呢，除了呢，我们要多观察这个图中人物的，刚刚讲到的这个表情啦、服装啦、肢体语言以及背景有什么细节等等呢，要记得呢，你要问一问自己人、事、时、地、物这几个问题了。我们呢，回答这几个问题呢，然后并且呢，用这几个问题来把你观察到的细节哦串在一起，变成一个完整的故事。
So you know you're writing a narrative and that you need a ton of descriptive language to involve the reader. But just how should you go about writing this essay? Well, you'll want to come up with a central theme for your story based on your interpretation of the pictures. Then you'll want to describe what is going on in each picture and also find a logical way to connect the pictures together. In picture 2, we see a man with his hands in his pocket. In picture 3, we see that the man has taken his hands out of his pockets, but something has fallen out. Now, your narrative should fill in the gaps so the transition between the two pictures is smooth. For example, you might want to ask yourself what prompted the man to remove his hands from his pocket. It also appears that he didn't realize that something had fallen out of his pocket as he removed his hands. In contrast, the panhandler notices the money on the floor. What does the panhandler decide to do? Wait for the man to leave and take the money? Or inform the man that the money has fallen out of his pocket?
我们呢观察了图片上出现的所有东西也回答了我们刚刚讲的时事人地物这些问题了。那所有的细节都确定了，那么下一步呢就是呢要发挥你的想象力了。我们要把这个图跟图之间的发展没有画出来的也要想出来了。比方说呢，像我们看到第二张图这个男生的手是插在口袋里面，到了第三张图的时候，他手已经离开口袋了，这个钱也掉出来了。所以呢，是不是这个过程呢把这个钱给弄掉了？为什么他的手要伸进口袋，要伸出口袋等等，这些问题呢就需要你来想象了，让整个故事呢符合图片且通顺咯。
Don't forget that your essay should have an introduction, body, and a conclusion. Now, your conclusion should be reasonable, though. I think there aren't many restrictions to how this story can end as long as you come up with a good explanation. For example, we might say the panhandler told the man the money fell out of his pockets, and to thank the panhandler, the man decided to give him the money. Or maybe the panhandler saw that the man didn't even notice the money, so he decided to follow him and see if he'd drop more money.
No.
The possibilities are endless. You should also make use of transitions to connect your ideas. This will prevent your essay from being too choppy.
注意到呢，我们的文章不管是什么样的文章呢，我们一定都是要有这个引言，那文章的主体最后要给它下一个结论了。那至于这个中间怎么发生呢，我们只要是合乎这个图片的这个画的内容就可以了。其实呢，细节是可以很多地方你是可以发挥想象力的。比方说呢，像是这个乞讨在路边乞讨的这一位呢，他看到了这个钱从口袋里掉出来，掉到地上之后呢，他怎么做？比方说呢，他是叫住这位先生把钱还给他，还是呢，他是像刚刚 Angeline 老师说的呢，偷偷的跟踪这个人呢，看他会不会掉出更多钱等等呢，这个发挥呢，你是可以自己去想象因为最后给了一个问号所以自由度是很高的。
Another thing to keep in mind is to ensure your writing is free from grammatical and spelling errors. Rather than using complex words that may require complicated grammar patterns, it's better to use simple and easy to understand words to avoid the possibility of getting marks docked off for errors.Your writing should be clear and concise.
没有错，写文章呢不是要炫耀你会多难多高深的单字，还是呢你会什么高超的文法或修辞，重点呢是要读者能够看懂知道你是在讲什么故事。所以在这边呢，与其用一些不熟悉的困难的用法呢，不如用你有把握的简单清楚的把这个故事给呈现出来。这一点呢在考试的时候尤其重要咯。
There are a few other things you should keep in mind. Narratives are usually written in the past tense, so pay close attention to your tenses to make sure they are consistent throughout the essay. You might find it helpful to name the characters in your story. It'll make the story easier to follow, and you can also save your word count for more important details. Okay, so now that we have a general idea about the content of our essay, it's time to start brainstorming some specific ideas for your story. We can do this by jotting down our observations beside each picture. Write down what first comes to mind when you see the picture. For example, in the first picture, you might write beggar, trash, a sign asking for money. In the second picture, you'll pay attention to the man who enters the picture. This man is in a good mood. He's whistling and he's got his hands in his pockets.
好，所以呢，这篇看图写作呢，我们知道了要写些什么，但是如何来实际来执行呢？首先呢，第一步我们可以做一些笔记在这3张图片旁边写下你所观察到的重点。比方说呢，像第一张图，你就可以写下这个无家可归啦、乞讨啦、有垃圾在街上啦等等，所有你观察到的细节。那第二张图呢，我们就可以写说这个，比方说口哨啦、年轻男子啊、干净整齐啊 ，OK， 把你观察到的这些线索呢都笔记下来。
Now, as you are writing down ideas during the brainstorming process, you want to address important questions like who is in the picture, where are the people, when is this event taking place, what is going on. Sometimes these details may not be obvious in the picture, so you can use your imagination to answer some of them. But don't let your imaginations run too wild because remember, whatever you come up with must be logical.
在记录的过程中呢，我们就可以问一下刚刚有提醒同学的这些问题了，就是呢时事人地物。那有一些事情呢是并没有被画出来的，就需要大家来脑补一下把这些问题呢用想象力给回答出来。那注意到呢，不管你的想象力多么丰富呢，我们的这个故事情节呢跟你写下来的这些答案呢，一定是要这个 logical 合乎逻辑的，不要太跳痛我们的故事必须是合情合理的。
Another thing you want to do is observe these subjects and their body language, especially the position of their hands, as they generally represent emotions and actions. We can tell the beggar looks miserable, right? He's wearing a frown. He's leaning against the wall, feeling hopeless. Although he has a mug in his hand, we can tell he isn't actively asking for spare change. His hand is just resting on his knees. Is it because he's tired? Or he feels hopeless, like there's no point in extending his arm because people will ignore him anyway?
这次提醒大家呢，我们可以多观察表情观察肢体语言这些细节。比方说呢，像是第一张图，我们的主角呢，他的表情是怎么样的？然后呢，要特别注意到他的手因为通常这个手势呢，跟你的感情是有关系的。比方说呢，像他的手虽然说拿着杯子在乞讨，但是呢，他不是很积极的伸出去跟人家要钱，而是呢，这个放在膝盖上看起来这个了无生意。是为什么了无生意？是他这个失去了希望呢，还是他很累等等的这些呢，我们都可以透过这个观察他的手势、他的表情呢，透过这些小地方呢，再运用我们的想象力来推测了。那最后呢，记得我们刚刚已经把所有在每一张图片我们观察到的点呢都记下来了。再下来下一步呢，我们就要把这些点连成线我们呢把这些观察到的这个细节写成句子，那这些句子呢就可以形成我们的文章的大纲咯。
So the next order of business after brainstorming is to organize the ideas into an outline. Now, an outline can help us organize the paragraphs into an order that makes sense, and it also ensures each paragraph is fully developed. Let's take a look at the sample outline in the magazine. The first topic sentence tells us what's going on in the first two pictures. The first character is given a name. It says, Joshua was begging for food on the street. Then other details follow.He noticed a young man walking along. The man seemed to be in a good mood.
好的，马上呢看到我们这个范例文章的大纲了。那首先呢，在一开始我们这个文章的最开始呢，他马上给他下了一个主题句让大家呢看到说我们今天写的这个主角他发生的这个地点以及时间，他在做什么事情等等这些细节在我们的主题句里面呢就已经被呈现出来。他说呢 Joshua 他把这个在路上乞讨的这个男生呢把他叫做 Joshua， 他在干嘛呢？他在这个 begging for food， 他在乞讨食物on the street。 OK， 马上呢第一个主题句呢就把我们的这个人物他在做的事情跟地点都点出来了。那接下来他就讲了其他的细节。他说呢，他注意到呢 a young man 有一个年轻的男生呢在这个路上走呢，然后呢他怎么样呢？他 seemed to be in a good mood， 这个男生呢看起来好像很开心心情很好的样子。那第二段呢，我们预期呢他应该就要带出转折了，马上接到我们第三张图片发现钱掉了的这个状况。
The second topic sentence tells us what's going on in the third picture. It says, a bill slipped out when the man passed Joshua. It says, the man didn't notice. Joshua called out to the man. The man was grateful and he gave Joshua the money.
好，所以呢，看到我们这个第二段落呢，果然呢，如果我们预测的呢，就马上接着描述第三张图片里面发生的事情了。然后呢，他就带出了这个转折。他说呢 ，a bill slipped 就是滑出来、溜出来了。所以呢 ，a bill slipped out。OK， 一张钞票掉出来了。当这个男生呢经过 Joshua 的时候，那呢，他说呢，这个男生呢没有发现钱已经掉出来了。所以呢 ，Joshua 怎么做呢？其实呢，后面就接到我们第四张图片的这个问号了，就是呢 ，Joshua 看到钱掉出来之后，他所采取的行动。他说呢，我们的这个在路边乞讨的这个男生呢 ，Joshua， 他 call out to the man， 他就叫住这个男生哦，然后跟他说，你钱掉了。所以呢，最后呢有一个好的结局哦。他说 ，the man was grateful， 这个男生呢很感激他，所以呢就把这个钱给 Joshua 了。
Okay, the conclusion tells us that Joshua promised he would spend the money on food and clothes.
最后呢，我们记得文章要下一个结论哦。我们呢最后有一个 happy ending 哦，他就说呢 ，Joshua 就答应他说，好的，谢谢你这个钱呢，我一定会拿去买食物，拿去买衣服，做有用的这个用途。
So I can kind of guess, or we can kind of guess based on the fact that it says Joshua promised he would spend the money on food and clothes. He almost either reassured the man that he wasn't going to spend it on drugs or alcohol, or that he intended to spend it on drugs and alcohol, but he felt bad, so he changed his mind.
Yeah.
We will take a look at our sample. We'll see how this outline was transformed into an essay, but we won't do that until we take a quick break, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Let's take a look at our basic sample. Basic sample. Joshua was begging for food on a dirty street full of trash. His life had fallen apart several years ago as a result of bad luck, poor decisions, and a daily struggle with alcohol. Joshua noticed a young man walking along. He seemed to be in a good mood and was whistling happily with his hands in his pockets. As the man passed Joshua, he took one hand out of his pocket and a 1,000 NT bill slipped out. The man hadn't noticed he'd lost it. Joshua looked at the money, thinking of all the alcohol it could buy. However, as he reached for it, he stopped. The young man's bad luck could put him in the same situation as Joshua. "Hey, you dropped something," Joshua called to the man. The man was grateful for his honesty and said he could spare the money. "I'll spend it on food and clothes," Joshua promised, and he kept his word. Okay, I like this essay. It gives us some background information about Joshua. It doesn't just say, here's Joshua, he's on the street. It tells us why he's on the street. His dependency on alcohol and unfortunate events has led him to this path. Now, people who end up on streets do so because they feel destitute. A lot of homeless people suffer from mental health issues or drug addictions. Now, some people become homeless because they ran away from abusive homes. Homelessness is a big issue in metropolitan areas and big cities because of the lack of affordable housing and social funding.
Destitute 这个形容词是表示一贫如洗非常穷困，一毛钱都没有了。那为什么这些人会变成如此呢 ？OK，homeless 无家可归，其实呢很多并非是自愿的。OK， 像是我们这个故事里的 Joshua， 他可能是这个一步一步错误的决定，然后呢他的这个对酒精的依赖等等，最终导致他变成了无家可归。但是呢也有其他很多的可能哦，比方说他可能是有这个mental health issue， 他的心理健康有状况啦，或者是呢他是这个 drug addiction， 他是药物成瘾，也有可能呢是他们家有状况了，比方说呢他是被虐待了，或是等等的，所以他必须要逃离他的家里。那另外呢，这个 homelessness 就是这个无家可归呢，事实上在这个大都会，比方说像台北、像纽约，是一个很大的这个问题哦，因为可能他们这个房价太高啦，或者说他们没有这个很多的援助来帮助他们有一个好的地方可以安身立命。
So yes, it's a very important topic to talk about. And the fact that this writer included the fact, how Joshua ended up on the streets and why Joshua is homeless is really good because it kind of gives you a perspective of what is Joshua doing? Why is he there? He didn't choose this for himself, right? Mm-hmm. He's not, I don't want to go to work anymore. I just want to go beg on the streets. That's not a choice that he made. Okay, the phrase fall apart means to break into pieces. For example, Annie bought some cheap shoes that fell apart after a week. Now, we can talk about people falling apart, which means to experience serious emotional problems that make you unable to think or act in a usual way. This tends to happen after something traumatizing happens in your life, like when you lose a loved one.
Fall apart 这个动词片语呢，就表示这个破碎、碎裂了。比方说呢，那双鞋穿一周就烂掉了，一双便宜的鞋子，它的鞋底鞋面分开了。OK， 这个呢就是 fall apart， 或者是呢，像你的感情也可以破碎。比方说呢，像 their marriage fell apart， 他们的这个婚姻破灭了。那你也可以说人 fall apart， 就表示呢他是精神崩溃了。比方说呢，我们刚刚说他的婚姻破灭了之后呢 ，he began to fall apart， 他就开始这个精神崩溃了。
Now, we know that Joshua has an alcohol addiction, and he will likely spend whatever money he gets today on alcohol and maybe some food. Now, when you have an addiction, it's something that you cannot control. So it's not that Joshua chooses to splurge on alcohol and not food. He needs the alcohol to survive. That's what he feels like. In fact, when he thinks about taking the money on the floor, he thinks about all the alcohol he could buy with 1,000 NT dollars. Now, this is a common assumption people make when they pass by panhandlers. Will this beggar use this money wisely? Some might even wonder, why don't they find a job instead of sitting on the side of the road begging for money? There can be many reasons for why people end up on the streets, and it's not right for us to judge. In fact, although initially Joshua thought about blowing the money on alcohol, he decided against it, and he opted to spend it on food and clothes.
Yeah, and we're very happy to know at the very end of the article it says he kept his word. That's very nice.
Exactly. So that's really good. So now we are going to take a look at our advanced sample. Advanced sample. For years, Jeremiah had sat on a dingy street corner begging for change. He had fallen on desperate times after the breakdown of his marriage. One day, a young man strolled by with his hands in his pockets. Reaching to scratch an itch, the stranger didn't notice a 1,000 NT dollar bill fall from his pocket onto the ground. However, Jeremiah's eyes locked onto it instantly. For him, this crumpled banknote represented a week's worth of meals, or maybe a pair of shoes. But it wasn't rightfully his, and Jeremiah wouldn't stoop to becoming a thief. So he called out to the stranger. His heart sank as the man turned around, but Jeremiah smiled anyway as he gave up the money. The young man paused before grinning widely. "You passed! Congratulations!" What? Jeremiah looked up, confused as a crew with microphones and cameras emerged. The young man explained that this was all a social experiment. Now they were offering him a new life, an apartment, job training, and more. They were giving him everything he'd longed for. Jeremiah paused. What would have happened if I hadn't given it back? What? But you did. That's the point, the young man replied. You would have left me on the street if I had taken it to feed myself, huh? Why would you mess with someone's life that way? Jeremiah sat back down. I'll make my own way, thanks. I don't need qualified charity. The shocked crew members looked at each other and then slowly left. Jeremiah felt a strong sense of self-worth right then. He determined then and there that he'd work to better his own life rather than let others decide his fate for him. Wow, this story has not only one, but two interesting twists of events. It totally caught me off guard. Now, we discovered that Jeremiah was part of a social experiment. I guess the point of this experiment was to see whether a person under such desperate circumstances would resort to taking something that wasn't his. Now, seeing that Jeremiah was an honest citizen, he was offered housing and job training. Now, that's awesome news for a homeless person, isn't it? But it wasn't, because Jeremiah felt hurt. He was offended. He felt like this social experiment was some sick joke and that the crew was messing with his life. Had he taken the money, would they have just left him on the streets even though they could have helped him?
好，在这个进阶的这个范例当中呢，有两个让故事更加精彩且引人入胜的转折点了。首先呢，第一个部分呢是发生在这个 However, Jeremiah's eyes locked onto it instantly. Eyes locked onto something. OK， 强调呢目光锁定在某个东西上面呢，比起你单纯用这个看或是注意到呢，它有这个更加强调的效果。那这边讲成这样呢，没想到他却叫做路人哦，让读者认为这个耶利米呢只是善良的提醒他说你钱掉了。所以呢，当他 heart sinks 心都沉下去了，在这边他用了很多很强烈的说法。那这边呢 heart sinks 心沉下去表示没有希望了，很难过的时候，忽然呢又有这个转折，年轻人要给他钱，又没想到呢最后他放弃了这些钱哦。那这些转折呢就会让读者呢感到怎么样，意料之外。那这些发展呢就是制造这个我们文章吸引人的关键了。
So this actually puts things into perspective because I've actually seen a couple of social experiments conducted on homeless people. Now, these people living on the streets are human, and they obviously have feelings, right? So they deserve self-worth and as much as any other individual. Anyway, let's take a closer look at some of the details the writer used to tell the story. The question I wanted to know was, why did the man remove his hands from his pocket, right? And this writer answered it. He said to scratch and itch.
To scratch and itch 就是抓痒的意思。Actually, I do it all the time. Not to scratch an itch. It's like put my hands in my pocket and yeah. Personally, I don't have a wallet. I just put everything in my pocket.
I see.
Yeah, so I have to check if everything
is still
yes.
in your pockets. I see. So do you put your hands in your pocket all the time? Or you always have your hands in your pocket? Like this man, he was walking down the street and he had his hand in his pocket.
No, I don't do it like all the time. Yeah, but I check. Yeah,
I
and
see.
Sometimes
You're just checking
things
to make
fell
sure,
out.
right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if you could have guessed Jeremiah's reaction to the social experiment from the fact that he decided not to take what rightfully wasn't his. It said that he didn't want to stoop to becoming a thief. Now, the verb stoop means to do something that is not honest or fair. For example, you might often hear people say that they won't stoop so low or stoop to the same level as a person who has wronged them.
Stoop 这个动词呢就有弯腰的意思了。你想象一下中文说的这个为五斗米折腰，在这边呢大概就是这样的概念哦。我们就说这个 Jeremiah 他是一个有尊严有自尊的人，他不愿委屈自己，不愿意弯腰哦，不愿意委屈自己来当个小偷。
On the last page of this unit, you'll notice that we've provided another exercise for you to practice brainstorming with. So brainstorming promotes creativity and helps you generate ideas quickly. So it's very important in the writing process, especially during exams. It'll help you think faster, get your ideas faster. So take a look at the brainstorming exercise at the end of the unit. Okay, so I felt like this was one of our more heavier topics for a writing unit. But it's good that we spend some time talking about homelessness because it often gets overlooked. I encourage you guys to do some research about this to educate yourself, to get to know more about homelessness. In Taiwan, I would say homelessness is not a very huge issue, is it? I think housing is quite affordable and the government has funding in place to help people, right?
Yes.
I'm just making a guess because I don't see a lot of homeless people. I think there's only one area where I've seen it, and it's near there's a temple, Longshan Temple.
Yes.
And then there's like a park there, and I saw like some homeless people there. But other than that, I don't really see very many.
Yeah.
Perhaps
we don't pay enough attention
to them.
Maybe
we're not paying enough attention to that. Anyways, we've come to the end of our episode. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. This is Angeline.
This is Sam.
Goodbye.
Bye.